Okay, so welcome everyone to this Spot the Signs webinar. Really excited about today. My name is Rob Lovesey. I'm the Business Development Manager at Serve and Protect Credit Union. And today I'm joined by a guest panel of experts from GamCare and StepChange, who are gambling and debt management charities that offer support. Today we're going to cover off some really topical issues. We're launching this webinar with the support of Derbyshire Constabulary. We're going to be looking at the impact of gambling and how that links to problem-related debt. And the objective today is to really, you can be from an employer's perspective, so you can be looking at how do you identify gambling or problem-related debt within your workplace, or you could actually be looking at it from an individual perspective. Am I suffering? Have I got an issue? How do I get support, and where can I go to address it? So we launched this webinar because for the last 12 months as a credit union, we've been tracking some of the trend data with regard to use of gambling and problem related debt with the stakeholders we work with. So Serve and Protect, we serve the police, military, prison, fire and health services. So in the last 12 months, when people were applying for credit, we analysed some of the trends and we found that actually 1 in 6 of applicants that applied via open banking were actually using payday loans or high interest credit. Now, high interest credit is defined as an APR of over 100% APR. So 1 in 6 of our applicants were applying for credit with us. Now, we're responsible lenders. We can't help everyone. There are times we are not able to lend to people, particularly with regard to whether they've been gambling or if we see frequent patterns of borrowing behaviour. Now, those 1 in 6, the average amount spent on high interest credit per month was about £185. So each month they were paying that amount just towards their high interest debt. And then you look at gambling, we saw that 1 in 4 applicants were gambling more than £50 per month. Now, this may surprise many people, but on average, the gambling spend was about £221 a month, equivalent to about 14.3% of their monthly income. Now, really is staggering. And as a credit union, we're not for profit, but we see this on a regular basis. And I think because we're around it a lot, we take it for granted and think that everyone's aware of this. But we want to use this webinar just to make sure our stakeholders are aware that this is going on within the markets we serve. And when you look at the stats, you know, it's estimated that 500 suicides a year in the UK are linked to gambling. So we wanted to do something to help support those people we may not be able to help with regard to when they come to borrow money from the credit union. And we want to make sure they know where to turn and how to recognise if they've got issues with regard to gambling or high interest credit use. So I'm going to hand over to Eartha from GamCare, who's going to speak a little bit about gambling and how to identify the trends and what you can do as an individual to seek support. So over to you, Eartha.
Brilliant, thanks Rob. So just by way of introduction to GamCare, we are a national charity that supports anyone affected by gambling harms. So this includes providing support to the gambler themselves, but anybody who's been affected by their gambling. So this could be friends, families, colleagues, employees, etc. Before I go on, I just want to define gambling and gambling harm, because I think it's quite useful to understand sort of the beast before we start talking about how to tackle it. So we define gambling as to stake or risk money or anything of value on the outcome of something involving chance. So this definition covers all types of gambling. So we're talking about arcade games at the pier, to online gambling spaces, to those land-based settings like casinos and betting shops as well. And for gambling harm, this is defined as the adverse impacts from gambling on the health and well-being of individuals, families, communities, and society. And what this definition allows us to understand is that gambling doesn't just impact the gambler, it affects affected others and people around them as well. There was a piece of research done by Citizens Advice in 2018 that said for every 1 gambler, there are 6 to 10 affected others. So just that sort of statistic gives us a window as to how impactful and how far-reaching it can be. So at GamCare, we understand or look at gambling on a continuum, and this ranges from social gambling, which is characterised by the fact it's a form of entertainment, it's perhaps a sociable activity. There are limits on money and time being spent, and ultimately it's an enjoyable way to spend one's time. Then you've got on the other end of that continuum problem gambling, and this is characterised by the fact that that control element has slipped, such that more time is being spent gambling, more money is being spent gambling, and more time is spent thinking about it. There are significant negative consequences in this sort of end of the continuum around mental health, relationships, housing and work, which I'll touch on in just a moment. So the Gambling Commission posit that there are about 320,000 people who sit on the problem gambling end of the continuum. So people get into gambling for a number of reasons. We've got sort of for entertainment, enjoyable, for charity, but then there's also situations whereby it's used as an escape tool or a way to distract oneself. And for somebody to move from a social gambling problem to a problem gambling issue, triggers can look different to everybody. It can range from simple curiosity, perhaps a friend suggested an app you should try, right down to situations like a high stress job, which could lead someone to gamble, as I mentioned, to escape or to deal with that stress. So I mentioned the definition of gambling harms, and we discuss these in categories just for ease of discussing them, but they coexist and they impact and they influence one another. So the main categories of gambling harm are impacts on mental health. This might look like depression, anxiety, lack of appetite and poor sleep. Impacts on relationships, so this can be between family members, it can be romantic settings, and this might look like secrecy, lies, breakdown in communication. Then we've got impacts on work and education, so this might look like absences or an inability to concentrate or an inability or difficulty to undertake a task at hand. We've got impacts on housing, and this might look like non-payment of rent, bills or mortgage, and in extreme cases might lead to homelessness. We've got impacts on criminality, so there's a link between gambling and crime in that people might undertake income producing offences such as fraud, theft, drug dealing, etc. To get more money to gamble with, or more violent crimes such as criminal damage, public disorder, and also domestic abuse. And finally, we've got impacts on finances, which my colleague Raminta will now talk about in more detail.
Thank you, Arthur. So yes, let's talk for a minute about gambling related financial harm and what that looks like. Some gamblers may borrow money or go without essentials to be able to gamble. They may access high cost credit such as payday loans to gamble. Ask family or friends to bail them out, and in some extreme cases, as Arthur has just said, they may steal or commit fraud to fund their gambling. When gambling debt becomes unmanageable, it often happens that gamblers may start gambling even more, thinking that's a way out of the situation, thinking they can win the money back and pay off their debts. And some people may even start gambling in the first place, thinking that is an extra source of income, especially if they have a big win early on. So at GamCare, we run the helpline, and 7 out of 10 people coming to us mention some level of debt related to gambling, and we signpost our clients to debt advised charities such as StepChange. But also Arthur talked about the effect on family and friends, and gambling debt can have a huge negative impact on those who are linked to the gambler financially. So yes, so it's really important to remember that gambling is not a way to make money, and it's not the answer to money problems. So how do you get help with gambling? You can call us, GamCare, on free phone 0808 80 20 133. I'll just repeat that again. It's 0808 80 20 133. The helpline is open 24 hours a day, every day of the year. We can also refer you into one of our local partner organizations for face-to-face support. You can also access our website. It's It's gamcare.org.uk. It's full of information and resources. You can access live chat and chat to one of our advisors. We have a forum, and you can also enroll onto one of our online gambling treatment courses. So again, our website and our helpline and our support services are not just for gamblers, but anyone affected by gambling. So family and friends can contact us as well. And lastly, I would like to talk about some really useful tools that can help anyone stop gambling. So if you've been affected by gambling harms, or you know someone who may need some help, there are some tools you can recommend them to use. So first is gambling blocks offered by banks, and most of the biggest UK banks offer a gambling block, which means that you can stop gambling transactions going through. Then the next tool I'd recommend to use is GamStop. GamStop is a national self-exclusion scheme for all online operators. And GamBan, it's a software that what it does, it blocks access to all gambling websites and apps across all your devices. And GamBan is a paid for software, but you can get free license if you call our helpline. So yes, contact GamCare and ask for a free GamBan license. So yes, as you can see, there's a lot of free help and support that is available should you need.
Thanks, Raminta. That was really interesting. I'm going to put you and Earth on the spot a little bit, just ask a question now. So as a credit union, we get people applying for credit. And unfortunately, as a responsible lender, we can't help everyone. If we do see regular patterns of gambling, we have to say no. Some people then don't recognise it as a pattern of gambling behaviour. They're winning regularly. It's not affecting their net income, so to speak, because you see the losses, but you see the wins. We can't help them, and they find it hard to relate to the fact that it may be a pattern of behaviour that they're experiencing. How do you get someone to speak about it, or if you notice it with a colleague, or if you're an HR professional and you have to address it, you know, how would you suggest you approach that situation?
So do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well deflected there, Raminta.
Well, we have a screening question that we use in multiple different programs that is incorporated into various sort of processes and paperwork that might be a useful conversation starter. And it's just sort of generally trying to explore, so have you been impacted by your own and somebody else's gambling? Now, it's quite difficult to translate that into an open conversation. So, you know, that's one for the paperwork, but I guess it's just sort of exploring the different areas that it might be impacting them in. So going back to those gambling harms, we spoke about impact on relationships and finances and mental health. So if you can perhaps identify an area, you know, a clear area that for them their gambling is impacting, maybe that's just sort of an opening to explore if they think that gambling is impacting their mental health or their relationships. But I would definitely say that the topic is still shrouded in stigma, and sort of a lot of people in my training sessions liken it to the conversation around mental health sort of 20 years ago, where it's still quite taboo to put your hand up and say you've got a gambling problem. So I would say people will want to talk about it when they're ready. But I think just a general acknowledgement that there is support out there in the form of our helpline, in the form of our website, in the form of all of those suggestions that Raminta put forward. That's just sort of like the first step in the right direction, I would say. And off the back of that, I would also just say that we've got resources on our website that can be ordered, so leaflets that can be put in specific places like offices, which might be a good sort of conversations opener as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. That'd be really useful.
To add to that, Robert, if I may, So we do a lot of work with banks, and we also have a lived experience panel that we consult. So these are the people that have had gambling problems before. And what they usually tell us is that they would like their bank to tell them how much they're spending on gambling. I think problem gamblers, apologies, can be in denial about how much they spend. So just presenting them with those numbers can be an eye-opener sometimes.
And do banks do that?
Some banks are starting to explore that. Yes, one of the banks has started sending out letters to a cohort of people that they identified who are at risk of gambling harms and potentially spending more than they can afford on gambling. But it's a grey area, but our clients tell us that they would like to see more of that. And I know some banks have also started breaking down gambling spend in the app. So before that went under entertainment, now it has a separate category. So I think it can be really helpful for people to see how much they're spending, and it could potentially be a good conversation starter. But yeah, I guess just being really sensitive about it is really important, and not being too judgmental and accusing the person, but approaching it quite softly.
It's really helpful. And just to reiterate, with GamCare, it's completely confidential if someone comes to you for advice with yourselves, yeah?
Absolutely. Completely confidential and non-judgmental.
Okay. No, that's very important, particularly for the markets we serve, as you can imagine. That takes us on really nicely to Helen, that's joined us from StepChange. Now, people don't necessarily realise that problem gambling can have a direct link to problem debt, because if something happens within your life, a financially stressful event, and you may need to borrow money, for example, if you haven't got the money saved, where do you turn? If you go to your bank or building society, if they see gambling, pattern of behaviour, the likelihood is they may not be able to lend to you, or they may charge you a higher rate. If they can't lend to you and you haven't got friends or family, we're seeing a lot of people going down the route of turning to a payday lender and getting charged extortionate amounts of APR. So as I say, it takes me on nicely to Helen. So over to you, Helen, if you can cover off sort of problem related debt as a result of gambling.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Yes, just listening to Eartha and Raminta talk, so many parallels with the behaviours and the patterns that you see at GamCare that we also see at StepChange. So just as a brief introduction, StepChange, we're a UK-wide debt advice charity. Like GamCare, everything that we offer is free of charge, it's confidential, impartial and non-judgmental, and we're there to offer support and advice, and then ongoing support to help an individual explore their circumstances and offer advice on understanding their circumstances, where they are, and how we can look at a way going forward, and what debt solutions might be open to that individual. It might be that it's a debt solution the client takes forward themselves, or it might be something that we support them with, such as a repayment plan. But we will work with that individual and look at what is the best course of action for them to take. In terms of people contacting us, there's a choice. They can either come through and speak to our team of telephone advisors that are there to take the client through that process, or we also offer an online journey, which is more popular as more and more people seek that digital route. So individuals can go onto our website 24 hours a day and go through that advice journey online without needing to speak to an individual. As I mentioned, we're a UK-wide charity. We offer support and advice to hundreds of thousands of individuals every year. COVID has certainly turned things up on its head a little bit in terms of what we're seeing, but just to really reassure everybody that's listening today, we see individuals from absolutely all walks of life with whole huge ranges of different issues and problems and debt amounts and debt types, and it's really just to reassure you that if it's a problem for you, then we are there to help, however big or small you feel that issue is. We would encourage people to come forward as soon as they possibly can. We know that a lot of people wait a long time before seeking help, so about 50% of our clients will wait at least 12 months before contacting us. And obviously during that 12 months, the debt situation has escalated. And we know the sooner someone comes to us for help, the sooner we can look at getting something in place and working towards clearing those debts. But however big or small that debt problem is, please reach out, and we are there to offer support and advice to help look at a way forward. In terms of who comes to us, probably not surprisingly, we speak to more women than men. So about 60% of individuals coming to us are women. About 50% of individuals coming to us will disclose that they have a vulnerable situation aside from their financial vulnerability. That can be very wide ranging list of vulnerabilities. One of the more common ones is a mental health issue. But obviously, because I'm here today, we also see issues such as gambling. It probably accounts for about 2% of that 50%. So it's not a large proportion, but probably gambling is an issue that's under-disclosed, and that there are a lot more individuals dealing with gambling issues that perhaps haven't recognised that they have a problem yet, or don't yet feel ready to reach out and seek help. And I would say that's where we have a very big parallel between ourselves and GamCare. A lot of people do take time to acknowledge that they have a problem. I think debt is so commonplace in society today, isn't it? Whether you're coming out of university or you're buying a house, debt is just normal. And I think it can often be a little bit difficult and a bit blurred in terms of understanding of, is my debt problematic or is it not? And I think that can sometimes delay people in coming forward and seeking help. But we would, as I said earlier, we would just encourage, if you have a debt problem, however big or small, you are finding it difficult to manage it, please seek help. In terms of what professionals can do to help understand and identify problems in their colleagues, then again, there's a lot of parallels with gambling behaviour. But certainly some of the big ones for debt would be individuals perhaps withdrawing, changing in personality, perhaps not being that outgoing, exuberant person they once were, but quite withdrawn, not wanting to get involved in social events. Now that could be because their mental health isn't in a good place because of their debt, but it could also be that they simply can't afford to do it, but come up with various reasons and excuses as to why they don't want to do that. Borrowing money can often be another sign. People often will reach out to family, friends, employers when they've exhausted all other options. So they've perhaps gone down that route of mainstream credit, high cost credit, and then they start to approach family and friends because there's nowhere else to turn. And then another one can simply be big life events happening. We know that for many people that can be a big cause of debt problems. So whether that's been a loss of job, as we're seeing a lot at the moment because of the pandemic, other life events such as relationship breakdowns, bereavement, they can all trigger debt problems. So it's often worthwhile checking in with colleagues just to see how things are going, and I would really agree with what Eartha and Raminta were saying around that gentle probing, just asking a question, how are things with your finances, and just seeing how open the individual is to talking about that, and whether you feel it's appropriate to probe a little bit further.
No, that's great, Helen. One thing that you've worked closely with us as a credit union is the referral mechanism that StepChange offer. So I don't know if you can explain a little bit about that, and some of the stats around where if you ask someone, to pick up the phone and ring, you don't get as much of a response. So that could be useful for employers. Yes,
so we're very aware that people nowadays want to reach out in all sorts of different ways, and so acknowledging that, we created a new way that partner organisations can refer their service users into our service. Good old signposting still exists, so there's, you know, it's great and it serves its purpose. You're speaking to an individual in a professional capacity, they mention that they have a debt problem, then of course please feel free to signpost them to StepChange. But we know that very few people do act on that. You know, we can always find something better to do. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next week. So probably out of every 10 signposts, maybe if we're lucky, one of those individuals might contact us. So the new referral route that we have with the credit union, Rob, works really well, and it offers your colleagues the option to either send a digital link to our online tool, either via email or text. So the client has it there on the smartphone, they can click on it, it's kind of almost that first step done for them. Or we can take it further, and your colleagues at the credit union can book a call back with the client where they agree a time slot and a date. And then on that day and that time slot, we will then contact them and make that first step and call them and start the discussion and hopefully then progress the debt advice process. So yeah, early days with that one, but it's working well, and it's just about giving clients that choice and letting them choose what route seems to be the most appropriate and appealing to them.
Absolutely. So I think we've covered off a lot in this short webinar. Hopefully everyone's found it extremely useful. I just want to say a big thank you to Eartha and Raminta from GamCare and Helen from StepChange. I think it's really important, as I said, as a credit union, Serve and Protect, we're extremely passionate about helping our members, and that also means helping those individuals that we may not be able to help because of the issues discussed today. And we just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the support that's available from the organisations such as GamCare and StepChange, because people should know where to turn when they need support, and everyone can play a part, you know, as HR professionals or just as fellow colleagues. If you spot the signs, then be sure to use some of the tips and hints that we've shared today, and also we'll make sure we share and list the websites and the phone numbers should you need to speak to anyone. So thanks a lot everyone, and speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.